Millions of years ago, when the Earth was still young, breathing steam and boiling lava, life moved with heavy steps across its surface. There were no cities, no humans, only dense, misty forests, plains stretching to the horizon, and lakes reflecting the gray of the sky. Winds blew, carrying the scent of wet earth, and the sky rained ash from ceaseless volcanoes. In this raw world, brimming with violence and beauty, giant creatures waged a daily struggle for survival, a merciless fight where battles were decided by strength and cunning, not by reason or compassion. In the heart of one of those ancient forests, where trees intertwined like fingers, shadow dwelt among the roots. There lurked the master of hunters, the saber-toothed tiger, a fearless creature with fangs as long as daggers and muscles as taut as chains. It was not merely a predator, but a phantom master of waiting, knowing when to creep and when to strike, and its silence was more menacing than the roar of any other beast. His body hung low to the ground, his breath shallow, his amber-tinted eyes following every movement and tremor in the grass, as if time itself slowed before him. Across the way, the greatest beast of the land was approaching. A herd of mastodons marched with heavy, earth-shaking steps. Their bodies were enormous, with thick skin covered in dense fur that protected them from the bitter cold, and long, ivory fangs that gleamed in the pale dawn light. They feared nothing. They were the undisputed queens of the plains. But the queen didn't know that an eye was watching her from the shadows, waiting for her moment of weakness. Hunger had worn down the saber-toothed leopard. Days without hunting had made his bones groan. But he was not one to give up. He looked at the large herd, knowing that attacking it meant certain death. But in its midst stood an old female moving slowly, her paws leaving deeper tracks in the mud, her trunk trembling with exhaustion. Only then did the silent beast stir. He crept with the lightness of the wind, each step calculated, the air around him still as if the entire forest held its breath. Then, in a flash, he leaped from the trees, his scream shattering the world's silence. He sank his fangs into the mastodon's shoulder, but they didn't fall off. Instead, they shook the earth with a violent roar, their massive snouts whipping through the air. His body slammed into a tree trunk, and a cloud of dust erupted. The saber-toothed tiger retreated slightly, his breath ragged, blood trickling from his mouth, but he didn't give up the fight. He pounced again, this time leaping for the neck, his fangs digging into the thick flesh. The giant beast's scream filled the entire forest. Birds took flight in panic, and animals scattered in every direction. The mastodon tried to escape, spinning around, stamping their massive paws on the ground, but blood began to gush forth, and the air was thick with the acrid smell of iron. A single moment was enough for the giant to fall to her knees, then stagger, then slowly collapse like a mountain crumbling before a storm. The saber-toothed tiger stood over her body, his breath rising with the morning steam, his body covered in dust and blood. His eyes shining not with victory, but with survival. He had won, but he knew this victory was fleeting. For in this world, no one lasts forever. Every day is a battle, every victory a prelude to a new struggle. Around him, crows began to descend from the treetops, and the air filled with the scent of flesh and blood, a scene nature had grown accustomed to, as if it neither mourned Anne or rejoiced, but simply continued in its eternal silence. Thousands of years passed, then millions, and the traces of that confrontation vanished. Bones turned to hard fossils buried in the sand, and the stories lay dormant beneath the earth, waiting for someone to bring them back to life. When humankind arrived and began to dig into the heart of the rocks, they found the marks of massive fangs and shattered bones, and through them they read a story not told in words but rather by the very pulse of the earth itself. Such was life millions of years ago, a world devoid of mercy, shaped by strength and written by claws. Every encounter was a lesson in survival, every battle a reminder that nature preserves only the strongest, then erases the rest as the wind erases footprints in the sand. And among all that has passed, that moment remains. The confrontation between a giant sword and a mighty beast. An eternal symbol of the meaning of the perpetual struggle that began with the first roar on Earth and still resides deep within us to this day. But the Earth didn't stop there, and the story didn't end with the fall of the Mastodon or the triumph of the saber-tooth. Amidst the ashes and bones, life was rearranging itself, as it always does. The climate changed. The great seasons, in which humans hadn't yet existed, shifted, and ice ages blanketed continents in ice, while other heat waves transformed forests into deserts. Everything on Earth was subject to an endless cycle of decay and rebirth, as if nature itself were a living, breathing entity spanning millions of years. One day, after those giant creatures had become extinct, new forms of life emerged. Smaller, more cunning animals sprang from the caves, slithering in the shadows and learning to adapt rather than confront. These creatures were the nucleus of a new era, an era governed not only by muscle, but also by intelligence and cunning. And somewhere in Africa, the first step on a completely different path was taken. There, amidst the tall grasses and the red light of sunset, stood a creature with strange features, half animal and half something else. This was the beginning of humankind. He wasn't as strong as the saber-tooth, nor as large as the mastodon, but he possessed something no creature before him had known: intellect. His intellect was initially but a tiny spark, but that spark was enough to change the face of the planet. He learned to use stones as weapons, fire as shields, and words as a hidden power that intimidated others. From that moment, nature began to witness a new kind of conflict, no longer between fangs and claws, but between thought and thought, between survival and annihilation of a different kind. As time passed, the saber-tooth's tracks vanished into the sands, and the mastodon became a memory etched in rocks, while humankind continued its ascent, recounting the stories of those who came before, as if trying to understand itself through them. But despite all the civilizations and cities he built, he still carried within him something of that distant past, of that primal struggle that shaped his existence. Within him still resided that ancient roar, the voice of the first forest, and the echo of the eternal confrontation between power and life. Life, millions of years ago, has not vanished. It lives within us, in our fears, in our ambitions, in our will to survive at any cost. Humanity has changed the face of the earth, but not its essence. For the same nature that gave birth to giant beasts is the same nature that created us. The only difference is that we carry their traces within us. The hunters gleam in our eyes, the preys trembling in our hearts, and in our souls that timeless lesson, that survival belongs not to the physically strongest, but to those most capable of understanding, adapting, and dreaming. And so, the story of the earth remains an unending cycle, written by the winds, read by the rocks, and narrated by the bones that have become a profound silence within the planet. Whenever humanity looks to the sky or touches the earth, it feels that ancient, undying truth, that everything around us, from mountains to oceans, bears the memory of an ancient battle between life and death, a battle that began millions of years ago and continues to this day.